Welcome to another episode of the Healers of the World podcast. Every episode, I tell you how excited I am to be sitting with each of my guests. But honestly, it's so sincere, and I hope that you, my listeners, are drinking yourselves full from the deep and humble well of gnosis that my guests are providing, as the intention for this podcast has always been that it becomes a resting ground for curious souls that are seeking wisdom. And so, with all of that said, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, Mark Bockley, who has spearheaded and developed a thriving Dagara medicine community here in the West, and who has initiated over 150 practitioners in the US and in parts of Europe. Mark is fluent in French, Spanish, and fairly literate in Dioula. I hope I'm saying that correctly, which is a market language covering much of French West Africa. He has worked extensively with Malidoma Soma and Martine Soma, beginning in the late 90s, and he continues to speak and work with Martine, who remains a very close friend of his today. And as a side note, some of you may remember that there is one book that I've actually recommended in quite a few of these podcast episodes. And that book is, in fact, by Malidoma Some, and it's called Of Water and Spirit, one of my most influential and favorite books to date. So just, if you haven't read it yet, read it. Anyway, Mark has traveled to Burkina Faso, which is where the Dagara tradition comes from, on numerous occasions for many years. And during these years, he has been initiated on 3 separate occasions into unique Dagara divination practices. And let me just tell you that it is quite a thing, as I'm sure we will hear more about. Mark's book, Awakening Animism in the West, was recently picked up by Inner Traditions for publishing. And I actually have a copy of Mark's book that he self-published before Inner Traditions invited him to be published with them. And Mark, I can honestly say that the path that you have walked is quite remarkable. And I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing your story and your wisdom with this community today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited with what you're doing, and it's a beautiful thing to be sharing in such a lovely way.
Thank you, Mark. So, Mark, I mean, there's just so many questions, but the big question is probably the most multifaceted question. I would love to hear more about your journey, how on earth this tradition found you, how you came into contact with the Soma family, bearing in mind that our listeners today might not know that much about the Dagara tradition. Please tell us what parts of your story feel that they want to be shared today.
Certainly, I'll endeavor to do that. I grew up in Minnesota, a family with 4 boys, a very traditional family, but I started to have connections with Africa and a curiosity with Africa that no one else shared. It was strange in that regard. In my undergrad years, I went on a trip to Tanzania and Kenya, and I was there for about 5 months. An old roommate of mine was then a Peace Corps volunteer, so he sort of invited me to come. Anyway, everything about my experience there blew my mind and really shifted my perception of what humanity is, what is real, what's happening, what's going on. And I recall flying home and saying to myself, there's something happening there that is not happening here. And I have to figure this out. I was 18, 19 at the time, so I was quite young. So it happened then that I was so entranced by all of it, I jumped right into the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in the Ivory Coast, which is right adjacent to Burkina Faso, where I do a lot of my work. I began to be pulled into the realms of animism, which is something that unfortunately really got sidelined as the West developed. A lot of Western spiritual traditions in 2000 BC, etc., began to step in and really take over Western consciousness. So animism got set aside, even though animism is the most actively practiced spiritual orientation you can find on the planet. I think the whole planet was entirely that previously, and other things have come in. So animism has really opened my consciousness. I have made multiple trips back to the Dagara and have been in connection with Malidoma Some and his sister Martine. Malidoma passed several years ago. Martine, his sister, we first connected in the late 90s, and she was an invaluable asset and friend to me. We were very close friends. And she shared just tremendous information. She is the sort of library of the family. There are still, I think, 7 remaining boys or men in the family. And she divines for all of them. She tends all of them. Everyone goes to Martine when something's happening. So she's probably the most incredible shaman I've experienced and seen. And I've had the good fortune to really pick her brain for the last 30 years. And she's very open and very sharing. So I've had this great fortune and this great welcoming into the Some family. It's a bit of a fluke how it all happened, that this first sort of energetic exchange occurred, but I'm very glad it did. And it keeps coming in little waves. There are still people going to Dano. It's proven to be a kind of a gateway into these realms, which are very hard to find your way into. So the opening was quite remarkable, quite beautiful.
So, Mark, why do you believe that? What sits there in your ancestry, or sits there in your history, that has opened this gate for you? Why were you in?
Yeah. Maybe I'm a bit of a rabble rouser. To shake things up a little bit, the West has been so conflicted by monotheism, and it's been so pervasive. I like to say, I often speak when I'm talking to a new client or something, I will say, listen, Americans are the most spiritually ignorant people on the planet, bar none. And we truly are. America is a spiritual wasteland. We perceive a God, but that God won't talk to you, won't reveal itself to you, won't even engage with you. And if you talk to it, we don't know what's happening. And so that's our setup. That's our spiritual vision in America. That's a big nothing. So we are the most spiritually ignorant people on the planet, I like to say, Americans. So the Dagara work that I got exposed to, all of these things really blew up my mind and said, wow, there is so many different ways to live and inhabit the earth and to be part of an animistic frame where everything speaks to everything and everything is valid and useful and important and needs to be honored as a being. And that's a real shift in consciousness that I really was pulled to. I'd love to say that my family understands it and appreciates it, and a couple of my brothers do, but it just kind of remains crazy stuff to them. But I found clarity and sentience, and above all, Martine taught me how to divine, and then I've been initiated in several different forms of divination, 3 separate forms over the years, and these have unlocked remarkable apertures and visions into what's happening and what to do. Just the notion of divination and the notion that we have nothing like that in the West is surprising to me. There's really nothing that can do this, but in the course of a short divination, these major chunks in a person's life and issues and spirit can be seen and tended, and through ritual practice be healed and washed away. So it's a remarkable technology. The Dagara are not alone. The Dagara are there's 60 ethnic groups in Burkina Faso. The Dagara are just one. And I don't doubt that each ethnic group has just as potent a series of medicine practices, even if they're entirely different. They will get to the same end point and see the issues. And I've had just mind-boggling experiences with people. There was I remember once that we were going to be working with a new diviner, and my friends in Burkina Faso said, okay, this diviner is going to come and make a visit so he can better understand you and your family. And he sent his dog to make the visit. Okay, his spirit dog. Dogs are very potent and do remarkable things. In the morning, I woke up, and I didn't know this was happening. Okay, I didn't know anything about it. In the morning, I woke up and I said, I had the weirdest dream of a dog last night. And my wife said, I did too. And then we both went, huh. And we talked a little bit about what we had noticed. And then about an hour later, my daughter woke up and I said, Hannah, any dreams? And she goes, yeah, there was a dog in my room last night. And I said, get out. I didn't know why it was there. I said, get out. My daughter is unflappable. She sees spirit things. She just says, okay, go. or yeah, stay or whatever. And so I called Narcisse Sommet, Martine's son, good friend of mine. And I said, what's up with these dogs? Because they're everywhere. And he goes, oh, the shaman came to check in on your family and he sent his dog to do all the work. So that's what you were seeing. That's what was happening. So there are a lot of experiences like that that have played out. Quite remarkable. But the dogs bring back the information and then they allow the shaman to do the healing work that then ensues.
That's what really blew me away. I mean, I first came across Of Water and Spirit. I'm just reminding our listeners, that's a book that was written by Malidoma. And I read that in my 20s. So that was 20 years ago, or 20 years ago. And I found the book, well, the book found me again, dog eaten, still had the same copy about 2 years ago. And I actually had the book at my bedside table when I came across Kat. And that's been the connection to Mark is Mark is one of Kat's teachers. And some of you will know that Kat was the second podcast that we did. And so I had the book lying by my bed when I stumbled across Kat, and that's opened up a journey of itself. But what really blew me away from Malidome's account, there were two aspects of the book and I recommend this book to everyone I come across. My community will know I'm like constantly on at them, read this book, because I want people to understand exactly what you are expressing, Mark. And that is, do we know how rich the tradition of magic is in Africa? Because people don't. I'm a South African, and my community are all South African. And we don't need to keep going abroad. We don't need to keep going to Europe. It's here, guys. It's here. It's in Africa. Do you have any idea what sits here? Read that book. And the second thing that really, the second aspect that really influenced the way that I see the world, Mark, is that when Malidoma shares his story, we really begin to understand the imprinting, the imprisonment that happens on the magical aspects of the brain from monotheism and even from English, the way that we teach our children. That really impressed me about the book. And because that in Malidoma's story, when I won't give away too much of the book, but he goes into a French Catholic institution and then needs to come back to learn the ways of magic. And it is hard for his mind because of that imprinting. And so, Mark, I've got two questions for you on this. I would love to know, what has been your experience, given that you've grown up in the West? And so you have this imprinting on your mind, we all do from the West, in terms of going to Burkina Faso and receiving the initiations and the training that you did? Was it remarkably much more harder for you as a Western man? How were you welcomed because of this? Were there accommodations? I would just love to hear what you feel appropriate to share.
Certainly. The Dagara were incredibly welcoming. They were honored to think that we were interested in their practices. So I found them incredibly open. Probably over the course of many years, I've had one or two examples where people said, well, what are you doing here with our stuff? And there was this notion you're stealing something. But that it was like one or two out of hundreds of experiences. So they sort of view it as a very common thing. And in fact, every tribal group has these sorts of practices. So it's extremely common, extremely useful, and it's tremendously successful. The clarity and the experiences that you get, and I've just have countless stories, mind-blowing stories of things that happen and reveal, and the precision from one diviner to the next. Some people like to think this is sort of woo-woo stuff that's going on. But the reality is, if I can just go tell a quick story, I was making the circuit with Martine once, and we went to 3 different diviners over the course of 2 days, going places where no one knew us, no one knew Martine, never heard of us. You go in cold. When you go to the divination, you don't say a word. You speak your prayers into a coin, you sit down on the earth, the diviner picks it up and starts divining and doing his work. So there's no way anybody knew anything. One of the things that came up for Martine was this said, first diviner said, you have a great grandfather who is requiring an offering of 26 chickens on the mountain in his name. You need to do this for your lineage. And when we walked out of the divination, I was just I held myself in, but when we walked out of the divination, I said to Martine, have you ever heard of 26 chickens? And she said, I've never heard of that. It's crazy. Usually you'll use 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 5 chickens, and then you'll bump up to a goat, and then you'll bump up again, but never 26, never. Anyway, we got back in the truck and we drove about 3 hours away to this next diviner that we were told to go see. And when you go for a divination, you don't say a word. You just speak your prayers into the queen and set it down. They don't hear a word out of your mouth. The next diviner we went to, I'll cut it short, said to Martine, you have to make an offering to your grandfathers of 26 chickens. Identical response. The next morning, we went again to another location. Identical response. And I could give you many examples of this. So people like to say this is a little woo-woo. We're getting out here, aren't we? No, this is the scientific technology.
Very precise. I experienced that in my own readings with cats. I learned that from Malidoma's account, even as a young 20-year-old, it blew my mind, the precision and the technology that sits in Africa. And so, Mark, perhaps this is a bit of a naive question, but where you are trained, you are working with the wild spirits in Africa, and then you come over to America. Is there anything that needs to be done to incorporate a practice like this in America, to work on the land with America? I ask this because I don't have the training you do, but I will never go anywhere without making an offering to the land when I come somewhere new. There's always this idea of I'm taking medicine from here and I'm bringing medicine there. So can you just talk to me a little bit about that? From a medicine point of view and from the land, what it's like practicing something so African in America.
Sure. The Dagara work really builds around some very simple notions. There are certain entities and powers like the wild, the realms of the wild, which we would refer to as nature, the realms of water, the realms of the earth, the realms of the mountain. These sort of constellations can be replicated anywhere. So Martine never for a second thought there wasn't that my being in America and working with the spirits here would be any different. She said the spirits are the same. They're a little bit different because it's a different country and things roll a little bit differently. But she said the same entities reside in these locales and can be accessed. And that was immediately apparent. So it wasn't as if we were calling African spirits here. No, the spirits of the wild are here. The spirits of the waters, the earth, the mountain. All these pieces are here. It's a question of, do you want to engage? And no one really had spent much time, or Westerners hadn't, actually knocked on the door and said, hello, will you speak to me? And it's like, yes, we will. And I find this with all the people that I work with who are astonished with what they're capable of doing rather quickly. So these are resident entities that can be found in every part of the world. And they respond.
Which is so naturally obvious. I mean, my experience with nature has been, and my experience with magic has been that magic comes from having a sacred relationship with the unseen. No matter what kind of magic we're practicing, whether it's ceremonial magic and we're working with the angels, it comes from that sacred relationship. And when we enter into some kind of sacred relationship with the unseen, those unseen forces find a way to communicate back to us. So, yeah, that really does make sense. I would love to know, if you are willing to talk about it, what it has been like initiating into this medicine. And as a caveat, I just want to say that what's impressed me and drew me instantly when I heard Kat's story, because that's how this field all opened for me, was this idea of it being a closed tradition. And I love that because I feel that in the spiritual industry, just because of where we are in our evolution, things are quite wild. It's very easy for someone to just call themselves a healer these days, or someone to just call themselves a diviner without appropriate training. And so it was so refreshing to learn. Again, here is that precise technology around this being a closed tradition. And so, yeah, I'll loop back to my question. What do you feel to share with us about what it has been like initiating into this medicine for you personally?
Well, it's a remarkable thing to trust and to tap into the spirits. When I come in for a day of divination, in the morning, I come into my shrine room, and there's a lot of, I have probably 40 different shrine pieces now that have over time I've needed to make. They'll tell me we need this if we're going to work. So the shrines play an important role. You can think of shrine as a spirit hotel. The spirits live their lives, but when I work with them, they will come into these shrines I build for them. And then I can talk to them and they can talk to me. It's a much tighter connection. So things happen. Um, but what was remarkable when this first began, and I find this with many people that I initiate in the medicine, they will do pretty beautiful divinations first time out and be quite surprised. Once you're initiated, once you've done a series of rituals that are fairly easy to do, they're not crazy rituals, they begin to open the aperture of your being and your consciousness. And many things begin to unfold. So lots of people, and Kat, for instance, the first few divinations she did, as halting and as difficult, and she thought she was screwing it up. No, it was beautiful what she saw. And it kind of blew her mind. And I find that people rarely come out of initiation saying, well, that didn't work. I don't know what that was. I would say no. I would say it's about a 90% success rate. And the spirits talk quite readily. It's just part of Western confusion that these entities don't have worthwhile sentience. Why bother? Who are you talking to? What are you listening for? There's just been this massive disconnect. The reality is it's quite active, it's quite lively, it's quite communicative. It's just that we have barricaded our consciousness. I don't know if I got to your question exactly or not.
Yeah, I'm assuming that what you're saying from that too, that your initiations were quite beautiful. I mean, I suppose I'm asking if there were any harrowing elements. And that also comes from reading Malidoma's accounts of what it was like coming back into his community to initiate.
I don't know that I've found harrowing things happening to me. I certainly saw and engaged in and I've had a lot of negative work done against me by different people in the Dagara world, usually they have their reasons, like they think, well, last time you gave this guy a sheep and you didn't give me one, so we'll see what happens. That sort of, we call them wizard wars, go on. And so I make a point of making certain offerings to protect myself and to keep the realm, my house, fortified. But other than, I would say maybe 5 or 6 times I've been involved in having really strange, funky dreams. And I know, okay, someone is working on me, or someone is trying to extract something or shut me down or remove me or whatever. And then I have to respond. I wouldn't say it ever deeply scared me. I think probably the first 3 or 4 times it did shake me up. But I saw pretty quickly that these things can be worked around and set aside. So, and I haven't found a lot of the fear and the difficulty. I'm quite astonished. Most of the people who find their way to me or other people doing the work that I'm doing, I think they're already self-selected. They're already engineered in a certain way. And so it's a little bit natural. So it's really rare to be working with people for whom it really doesn't mesh. And as I work with people, some of the first experiences I have with them, remarkable stuff comes up right away. I say, oh my goodness, there are trees that move in your land, aren't there? And they say, yes. Every morning I get up and the trees are in different places and it scares me. I said, no. Do the following things. These things just emerge and come out. So for me, the beauty of divination is a remarkable tool because it allows you to access so many different points to travel and journey almost anywhere you need to go. Divination provides you with the lay of the land. Mm. What's there, what needs to happen. When I divine for a client, the clients, like I told you, they will say nothing, okay? They will say nothing. I will have my tools. I will start working. I will use my rattle, my different things, and I'm going. And then things start coming in. And I'll say, oh my goodness, something happened to your grandfather. And I'm seeing a large place of water and something had fallen in and is lost. And now it's creating pain and difficulty. And there's this and there's that. And I'm just, initially when I first started divining like that, I thought people are going to say, this is crazy. What are you talking about? I don't know anything you're talking about. 95% of the time, it's all, I don't think this is because I'm some unique person. I believe that 10% of all people have this skill set. Just like we have people in the world who are really good at baking or cooking food, and some people are really good at technology and certain things. There are these skill sets that exist. And one of them, and for a very long time, a very primary one, was that of the diviner, the seer. So it's deeply inculcated in all of our cultural identities, I believe. And there's nothing unusual about it. When I first went to see shaman and they would say remarkable things that were true, in Africa, I'd said, "How do you know this? Oh my God." And they would basically say, "Look, if you had this piece of paper and I asked you to read the paper, could you read that, Mark?" And I said, "Yeah, I can read it." That's what divination is. Like, why do you think it's so crazy and so weird? It's normal. They just thought like, this is everyday stuff. What are you getting so excited about? It's beautiful.
That reminds me, 2 guests ago, I interviewed a man, Dean Laprini, and he also works with the African traditions. And he spoke about, before we became like a tribal community and we were actually family communities, and everything was a lot more intimate. When a child was born in a household, it was easy to identify, oh, you're the storyteller, you're the builder, you're the healer, right? So there was nothing abnormal or incongruous around there being the healer, around there being the trickster, around there being the storyteller, around there being the teacher in the family. We all had our roles. And so that really speaks to what you're saying, Mark. And the other thing that I feel really supports what you're saying too is the fact that this is a closed tradition. So I imagine, because of that precise technology, exactly that precise technology, when someone is called in and goes through that, that process, that very precise process, when someone is sitting in front of you, that they are meant to be sitting in front of you because they've gone through that blind interviewing process, which is just so intelligent.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a little bit wayward. I'm just going to see where the energy takes us because you said something there that made me, I just want to percolate on something. About 2 years ago, I was listening to a tobacco wearer give a talk, and a lot of her talk was about the wizard wars. And younger me sat there and, thinking this is quite strange. And what is going on with this, with healers and all of this psychic attack? And I have just recently been having to learn a lot myself around psychic attack and really having to sharpen my sword of discernment and actually start creating a lot more protection for my family and I because of the psychic attack that we've been under. And I just wonder, with your experience, Mark, if you've got anything to say about this, because one would imagine that when one enters the healing industry, that this should be the last thing happening between healers, but it's right.
Yes. Yes. There's a great deal of this that goes on in Africa. We call it the wizard war. It's crazy. It's crazy what goes on. It really all comes down to jealousy. Jealousy nuances a lot of these things. And so there are numerous things where my family has been attacked. What I found was, for the most part, these attacks coming from Africa to America didn't go very well. They lost much of their potency. But I would say it's almost a daily event that a shaman will have to sort of check out and see, am I okay? What's coming? What do I need to do to thwart some incoming traffic, some negative vibes that are being sent to me? It's very, very common. I'd love to say it's all beauty and grace and healing and wonderment. But there's a dark side to this as well. And again, jealousy and power and those things bedevil humankind of any location come into play. That's why, honestly, that one's ancestors are probably the most formidable, important allies we have, bar none. Bar none. All the shrines I have, all these different spirits that I work with, if someone said you can only take one set of spirits to be with you forever, which is the most important? My grandfathers, our gendered ancestors, are our singular most important, caring, helpful, tenacious, fierce beings that we have. And I go directly to my grandfathers and I'll make specific offerings of specific things that I know that they want. And I will say, here's what's up. Here's what's happening. I need you to kick some ass. I need you to protect. Don't harm, protect. Hold at bay. So I'm never fighting anything. I'm just protecting. And these energies are common. They are pervasive. Jealousy, fear, anger, frustration, these play out in all human beings everywhere. And it has to be, we have to deal with it and face it. But it's quite common in the realms of people doing this kind of work.
I'm so glad you spoke about the ancestors. I'm always trying to impress on my clients and those that I work with this importance of tending to our ancestors and the invitation and the opportunity of simply being embodied in matter at this time. You know, if one is alive, there is the responsibility and the invitation of tending to what cannot be tended to by those who have crossed over, and the repair and the reconciliation that is part of our responsibility in being here. And there's this idea that I see amongst my clients, and I empathize, I understand it because it's something I used to carry myself. So often my clients will say to me, "Oh, I don't want to engage with my ancestors because they're a shady lot, you know." And the thing is, yes, especially for those of us from the West, white skinned, we know that there's colonialism. We can only imagine the atrocity that sits there. But the thing is, A, we can tend to it. We can go to the land now in our form and apologize and really create a lot of goodwill. But also, our ancestors don't only bring us our wounds and they don't only bring us the shameful memories. Our ancestors bring us protection, they bring us wisdom. It's like this accumulated wisdom that goes through the line. And when we are so arrogant as to repress or deny the wisdom that came before us and the wisdom that's carried in the line, the immense protection that sits there, I believe there's a certain soul loss that accrues from that. So I'm happy to hear my listeners hear you talk about the ancestors.
Yes, lineage is everything. I don't know. I think a lot of people don't know this, but the fact of the matter is that we will always reincarnate in our lineage. A family is a very tightly bound container, and a family lineage has work to do that runs over centuries, over time. So a family is a project, a work in process. We like to think of ourselves as, and I'm an individual, I like my dad, my mom, but I'm doing my thing. Kind of and kind of not. You are doing the work of your family. You will be because it's within the context of your family that everything you do can and will happen. We love to see ourselves as very individual people who have find our own road and done our own thing. And we may be deviant from our family in many ways. I certainly am. My brothers, despite knowing what they know about me, they haven't wanted to do this for themselves, and that's all good. But the notion of we have work in our family, we will probably have at least 3 lives. All of those will play out in the same family. And following those 3 lives, there's the opportunity to go elsewhere and to continue on should you want to, if things have gone well for you. But it's a very different notion than the way we have thought of our longevity, our impact, our role, and what we're doing. People don't like to be tethered to the family. But that really is where all the juice is and where all the power is. That's why our ancestors, and that's why ancestors get talked about the way they do. They really have tremendous capacity and tremendous power. Many of the Dagara people speak of ancestors as being more powerful than anything else. So our lowly moms and dads and grandmother and grandfather are not so lowly and decrepit. They're remarkable entities. It takes a lot for Western consciousness to buy that and go into that.
Mark, thank you for sharing that. That's truly profound. And I actually haven't heard it in that way before, but it really, really adds a whole lot of responsibility and impetus and intelligence to including our self-gnosis to extend beyond just us and into our ancestry. So this idea of know thyself, it really extends of like know thyself, but know thyself through thy ancestry too. And I love this idea
Yes.
of contemplation of what is the project that runs through my line. When I
Yes.
look at my ancestors, can I see some common themes? What is the possible project, right, that is trying to
Yes.
be ordained through me? It's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Really profound stuff. I'm going to put that in my pipe and smoke that. Thank you. And I just wanted to say too about the psychic attack that you shared. It is important for it is important to realize that it's not just love and light. And I reread a quote by Carl Jung today, that I feel so relevant to this, where he speaks about the fact that all humans are made up of opposites. And so our propensity for the light is our propensity for the shadow. And as one grows in the light, so does the shadow grow, because we are incarnating more of ourselves. So therefore there is more conscious and unconscious. There's always more to see about ourselves, and there will always be so much that we don't see of ourselves. And so in a way, it's natural that the bigger the light, the bigger the propensity of shadow, because that is something that has really surprised me about my path, is having to accept the human traits of jealousy and lack that exist in every industry and every field are not excluded or withheld from this field, even though one would imagine the intention is to serve. The service consciousness is so profound here. But I suppose if one looks at every industry, there is always distortion. And that seems to be some part of the polarity and the journey on earth, no matter how golden the charity or no matter how golden the intention, if there is light, there is shadow. And these are the rules that we play in.
Indeed. Indeed. And it's a shame that more of the kind of spiritual sentence that the indigenous world has helped create and keeps alive, that's not available to most of us in the West. We simply don't have access to some of this insight. The fact that I can access my grandfathers, my grandmothers, the many spirits that I work with, and they will come back with tangible answers, dreams, and ideas, is a huge, to have imagined myself walking through my life without that feels like, how would one do it?
So, Mark, then for our listeners, do you have any simple pieces of advice or tips for anyone who's listening to this and feels compelled to start opening up conversation with their ancestors? Where would you advise that they begin?
Sure. I would suggest that people start with our most potent allies will be our gendered ancestors. Okay. So I would have people attuned to their gendered ancestors and begin to make offerings to them, starting wherever you may want to. Any sort of family member that blazed brightly or had some connection, I would begin to work with those. They're always ancestors we're working with, not the living. Ancestors, spirits love food. That's why in every tradition around the world, sacrifices are made and offerings are given. I don't care what culture you go into. This is a truth that you will find anywhere and everywhere. The spirits need to be fed. They love to be fed. They miss feeding. They don't have it anymore. And so making small offerings, they don't have to be big. Anything that a family member loves, just get a small saucer and put a small amount of the food out, and then call their name and speak to them and tap on the plate. And then speak slowly and clearly and say, I greet you, Uncle this or whatever. I come and I bring this food to you. May you feed, may you be whole. If there's any tending, I'm listening, I'm attuning, send it into a dream, whatever may work for you. I too need your help and your loving and your seeing. You are able to see and know things that I cannot from where I am. May we be of help to one another. And I leave this to you in this spirit. And I'll set the plate down and I leave it at that. That's a basic way to begin. People will find if they continue to do it, I would say every 3 or 4 days, make another offering, keep talking and keep feeling. Something will bubble in. They'll have a dream. They'll get a phone call from their mom or someone saying, "Did you know about Auntie Jane?" And it's like exactly what was going on. Once there's a sense that there's coherence wanting to happen, I think the wires begin to connect. When we make an initiative, when we begin to engage, and the spirits offering. That's a reason why these exist.
You will know this so well, Mark, but just for our listeners, I read Teresa Dentino's book recently, and she just spoke it so eloquently when she spoke about mattergy, this idea of matter containing a certain energy that our unseen kin cannot or can no longer access. And that really grounded this idea beautifully for my Western mind, this idea of mattergy and the currency that matter holds for the unseen.
Mhm. Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, we sort of love and think the invisible is where all the energy is. Energy is just shared and parceled all around in different forms.
And what you said too about this mission that we share with our ancestors really rings true. You've got this idea of the currency of matter as an offering. And then there is the incentive from the ancestors to support us. And I think that's so important to remember and to walk with, is that our ancestors have a lot to gain by helping us too, because of this shared mission that you spoke of.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. So it's not just about the repair, it's not just about the honoring, but it's about the gift and the wisdom that sits there too.
that's right. That's right. And my opening prayers every day are directed to my grandfathers. And I start and say, I know nothing. I have a divination for someone I've never met, I've never seen. I don't know anything about them. What could I possibly know? I'm scared shitless. I need you to help me, grandfathers. I need you to go circle around. There are many of you, thousands of you. Go find everything I'm going to need and bring it back so I can access it somehow. And I give you this offering, and I may give you this ash and this water and these spirits. Take them. Please do what you can for me. That's kind of my basic prayer every day.
That's really beautiful. As you were saying too about animism being there in every single indigenous tradition on the planet when one looks back. I was busy creating some content for a book that I've been writing, and it was the same thing. When you look back in every single indigenous tradition, there is ancestor worship. No matter where you go on the planet, it's one of the unifying practices that our forebearers used to do. And digging into it even a little bit further, what I learned about this was that our ancestors many moons ago understood or believed, whichever one, of those concepts we want to attach ourselves to, whether they understood or they knew, that their ancestors were gods, and that it was because of their ancestors that knowledge was handed down. And so, when I researched far back, there was this understanding that this deep reverence, of going back to the source of the skills, of the knowledge. And when you go so far back, why the practice were, why people slept on their ancestors' bones. They buried their ancestors beneath their house because they wanted to be as close to that lineage and to that wisdom as possible. And I just imagine, or can you imagine, how much more wisdom would sit in our communities today if we kept these lines open.
Yes, yes, yes. We have no containers to contain the bounty that we have. It just kind of dribbles away in the West. And most people who live in indigeneity and animistic precepts, they think it's absolutely crazy the way we live, that we do not tap into those or save those or accrue those energies. It just kind of blows away. It's a shame.
On that note, Mark, you can see the zeitgeist of the ages. If you had to look at the yugas and the fact that we're in the darkest yuga at the moment, and that ancestor worship in so many parts of the world is so thin. And when you look back in time, you can see that when the consciousness was brighter on the planet, there was this tie to the ancestral worship and to animism. And so I'd really love to hear what you believe, the wisdom that you carry from your teachers as well in Africa, from your teachers, in the other realms, your unseen teachers, around what's happening at the moment on the planet. And how would you describe and preface these times that we are in? What is your perspective of what's happening on the planet at the moment?
It's bleak. It's bleak. I would paint this simple picture for you. English as a second language is growing and growing. I think by 2050, almost the whole planet will be at least somewhat fluent as with English as a second language. As we all know, a language encodes tremendous impacts in the consciousness, in the conscious field of a person. So just to learn English is to take on a lot of the elements of the American, the Western psyche. It just comes with the language when you learn it, even though you're unconsciously inhabiting it and you don't know it. It brings me a tremendous amount of fear to think that we will live in a sort of starved out world where animism is really more and more minimal. So my concern is pretty big around that. I do think many will be speaking English as we move forward. And this invites them to step out of their traditions and away from the sentience of their worlds. And so that's a fear I have. It's nice that Africa remains so sort of whole and complete. And I'm surprised. I'm surprised to see how little people seem to regard or even mention Africa. And the fact that they still think about Africa as a continent. My friends may say, I'm going on a trip to Europe. I want to go to Brussels, and there's a place up in Sweden that I want to go, and there's somewhere here where they're very precise and they know everything about it. And then someone may come along and say, I want to go to Africa, but they can't name a single country. So Africa kind of remains this hidden, the dark continent in some odd way. And few people seem to want to go there. And part of me feels like, good or bad. I don't know how to think about it. I get nervous when I see modernity racing ahead and us sort of losing our individual lineages, the practices, some of these things, as this sort of mega culture grows larger and larger. I hate to have such a dark perspective, but it is something that makes me nervous.
So I've never shared this publicly, but I feel like it's an interesting contemplation to bring in here. My youngest son, who is turning 8 in November, is profoundly autistic. So I wouldn't call him nonverbal, but his speech is very, very delayed. And as we know, there are many autists entering the plane at this time. And because of what I know and I learned precisely from Malidoma's book, it had such an impression on me, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, what the English language does to our magical mind. As much as there has been grief in accepting my son's journey for what it is, and also in trying to understand what the psyche of the planet is telling us about the incredible numbers of these nonverbal children entering into our society, particularly, Mark, particularly in Western society. I often wonder exactly about what you talk, because I'm like, my youngest son, Kojo, cannot be imprinted. He cannot be programmed, and so his magical mind is untouched. How very smart of him. And how very interesting that there are so many of these children entering, right, at this age, at this turning point. And I mean, it's not something that I share because I know I sound potentially a little bit irresponsible for all those that are rightly so concerned about this pandemic or endemic of these children coming onto the planet. But, when I look at my son, I see a human whose heart consciousness is untouched, it's unparalleled. There's no social ego, and he is completely independent in the way his mind works because of how gingerly and tentatively he uses the English language.
I think these children are being sent here on a mission, and they have their own kind of sentience that will make its way and help bring healing to our earth. We struggle so the initial response is we have to fix this. But if you step back, I'm not so sure. We have to learn how to listen a little differently and engage. We're being invited or told we need to shift out of something. And these ones are kind of the way showers. That's my simplistic take on it. But I believe that, and it doesn't surprise me that this cohort is assembling.
I share precisely the same perspective when I see this, and I'm so clear on our responsibility as his parents is not to fix him, but to accept him.
And to learn from and to access the brilliance that resides in this atypical expression or form.
And Mark, from your friends in the tradition, from the Some family, I'm sure you've got other friends in Burkina Faso, from the work that you do in these realms. What can you share about us, if anything, around like this time or this age, on the planet? How do the Indigenous traditions see this age as what's happening here, in terms of the broader cycles of the earth? Are we
Yeah.
just losing a fight, or is there some greater intelligence to the cycle that we're in?
I remember talking to Martine, this is 3 years ago, probably something like that. And she told me about an experience she had where she had come to a body of water and there was a spirit standing in the water. This was a dream she had. And the spirit standing in the water, like up to their knees, was looking at her and she was on the shore. And they were talking, and he said he's very nervous and he's very worried for us. He said, because we have not tended things and things are getting extremely hard. He was very worried, and he left that message with Martine. And in the end, he in the end of their conversation, he broke down, sort of crying, and then he sort of slipped back into the water and disappeared. And that was a very difficult thing to hear, but I do think we live in very dramatic times. The Martine tells me this. There are, I think it's up to people who care about these things and have means of antidoting them, just bringing healing to them. This is something we really have to put our energy into to allow things to remain coherent and whole. It's hard to say. It's hard to speak these words.
Well, I appreciate you speaking them because the times are dramatic. And this is a question I ask all of my guests because I think it's the most important conversation for us to be having. And my first guest, Vanessa Lightbody, she coined it so beautifully. She expressed it so beautifully that we need to remember our role as caretakers, that is the role of humanity. And we have lost our purpose. And our purpose was always to caretake for the planet. And this comes back to the role of animism, Mark, which, I'm speaking to the choir here. I'm singing to the choir. This is your work. This is your life's mission. But without that sacred relationship and recognizing the divine intelligence in the natural world, how can we ever fulfill our purpose?
Very hard. Very hard.
And Mark, just as a closing comment, do you have any advice for those listening to this that have been moved to this and who want to enter into deeper relationship with nature, who want to start allowing the natural or allowing themselves to be penetrated by the intelligence that exists in the natural world? How would you recommend that people start by opening up that relationship?
I would start by building some sort of ancestral relationship. You may have one or two grandmothers or grandfathers, uncles, whatever. Start making offerings and start speaking to them several times a week in prayer. And ask them that they help and they guide and they awaken your sentience, your ability to relate. You need that foundational energetic in the background. Then I would recommend that people begin to approach nature, what the Dagara will call the realm of the wild. So begin to just put your hands on a tree and send loving intention, prayers, requests, anything, but to begin to treat everything that we see and interact with as a living entity that has a consciousness and awareness and some level of intentionality. When we begin to imbue these different sources with that, the world becomes much more animate and alive to us. It responds. We can feel more. We can sense more. Our bodies are these beautifully, beautifully concocted things that can pick up all of these nuances. But the West has basically said, we don't need that full spectrum. We need you in this tight little room that you're going to work in and do this tight little job. But the full expanse is way too much for you. No, no, no. Enter into that expanse, awaken it, and let everything become alive and know that everything is alive, and ask yourself if you can feel it and if you could make a greeting and sort of move from there.
Beautiful. The allyship, the potential for allyship that exists is profound. And the insanity of isolating ourselves to the degree that we have when there are beings upon beings upon beings that want to support and befriend us, it's quite insane.
It is. And it's It puts us sort of as the only relevant and meaningful beings in the whole planet. So the grass, the trees, the birds. Yeah, I don't want to see the birds disappear. Yeah. We have put ourselves. I mean, this Trumpian moment we're in now speaks volumes to the consciousness of almost the whole planet now. We have put human at the apex of everything, to the degradation of almost everything as well. So it's a strange time we're in now. Very, very obvious.
Yeah, my daily prayer is that may beauty return. May beauty return to the rivers and the oceans and the mountains and the skies and the fires and the forests and the plants, and the meadowlands and the pastures, and to hearts of men. May beauty return. Because I just feel that it
Indeed.
encapsulates it all. Yeah.
May it
Mark,
be
thank
so.
you. Yeah, may it be. Thank you so much for the incredible wisdom that you shared today. I know that it's going to take a
My
few months before your book is out, but we will include that in the bio below. So everyone, watch out for Mark's book that will probably be coming out towards the end of next year. Mark, is that right?
Yes. I'm surprised it's so slow, but that's how it works.
Yeah. Well, watch out for Awakening Animism in the West. And Mark, what a profound path that you have walked. Thank you for your time today. It's been really special to have
Thank
you here.
you. Appreciate what you're doing very much. Please keep it going.